All right, CSA Lecture 4A is kind of exciting. It makes things a little more interesting. We're going to learn two topics. The first topic is going to be user input with scanner, and that's what this video is about. So let's look at here. So here I have basically the shell of a class. I don't really have anything going on. What if I wanted to find the average of three numbers? All right, this is something we should know how to do. So let's say num1 is 10, num2 is 20, and num3 is going to be 17. And if I wanted to calculate the average of it as a double, I could say double average equals, and then I would want to cast my sum to a double to make sure that I'm going to be doing decimal division, and then I could display my average. All right, and if I were to compile this and I were to run it, then I would get the average, and that sounds all well and good. But then let's say, okay, well, let me find the average of three different numbers. So every time I find the average of three different numbers, then I'm going to have to type in the numbers, and then I'm going to have to press compile, and then I'm going to have to run. And it'll give me the answer, but that gets kind of inconvenient and not necessarily user-friendly. So we have this class, and it's called a scanner class, and the scanner class allows you to actually collect information at the runtime. So in other words, when I click run, it'll pause and it'll wait for user input. And so it's actually a pretty handy thing, but it also has some little tricks. So we're going to walk through the scanner class. Now, system class is built in. The math class we can access directly, but the scanner class is not one that's just generated every time you run the program. So what we have to do is we have to import it. And so to import a class that someone else wrote that isn't necessarily built in, when you compile and run, you have to first say import, and you'll notice it turns purple, and then you say java.util.scanner. And scanner is going to have a capital S because it's the name of the class. Now what this does is it opens us up to be able to use another program's methods, another program's like functions that they've created. And so what we do to be able to access them, remember int, double, boolean, these are all primitive data types, but we're going to have to actually create a variable that's a reference data type. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I'm going to create a scanner object. Now to create a scanner object, you type the word scanner, and then you decide what do you want the variable name to be. Now the purpose of the scanner object is to, in this case, get information from the console. So console would be a good scanner object name, input would be a good object name, scan would be a good one. I'm just going to say console, but you can really call it whatever. And you're only going to need one of these. It can do the job throughout the course of the program. So I'm going to have my console, and I'm going to say new scanner, and then in parentheses I'm going to say system.in. Now you'll notice this says system.in, whereas down here we're saying system.out. So system.in is going to bring information in, and system.out is going to push information out. Now for our purposes, some of this may seem a little bit foreign, but it doesn't matter. Just know that you need something like this. In this statement, the only thing that's going to change for right now is the word console, and that could be any variable name, but I'm just going to keep it with console. Okay, so how does this work? Well, if you want to get information from the user, you got to tell the user what type of information you want. So I'm going to say, in a print line statement, I'm going to display, type in 3 integers, and I will output the average, let's say. All right, so now the person knows what they want, and so when I compile it and I run it, it'll say type in 3 integers and I will output the average, but then it goes straight to outputting the average. So what do we do next? Well, instead of hard coding a 15, a 13, and a 17, I'm going to have my console object that I created actually go retrieve the information from the console area. And so I'm going to tell console to get the next int and assign it to num1. And then I'm going to tell console to get the next int after that, and it's going to go in num2. And then I'm going to tell it to get the next int and assign it to num3. And so this time, if you watch what happens, when I compile it, it compiles, and then when I run it, it says type in 3 integers and I will output the average. Notice it's just kind of waiting here, blinking, blinking, blinking. It's waiting for me to type in integers. And so if I type in 10 space 20 space 23, it's going to calculate the average. If I were to run it again, and I just press Control R because I don't need to compile it, I could say 10 enter 15 enter 19. So either way, it's waiting for me to type in 3 integers, and someone can type it in on one line and someone can type it in on several lines, but once it gets the 3 integers, it's going to output it. If I were to, and I don't need to compile it, I don't know why I pressed it, habit. If I were to say Bob, it's going to be like, wait a minute, I'm waiting for an integer. Now we'll talk about how you can handle like issues with wrong inputs later on in the class. So for now, we're just going to assume that if I'm asking for integers, someone's going to give me an integer. Otherwise, you'll get an exception that says the input mismatch. It's waiting for an int, but you definitely did not give it an int. So that's pretty cool. That's how we can read in integers. And like I said, every time you run it, it's just going to wait, and it's going to sit there waiting for the 3 integers. And it's going to then take them, assign it to variables, and then just like how we would normally, it's going to do some calculations with it. So what if I wanted some decimal values? Well, I can say type in 3 decimals, and so I could change this to say double. I could change this to say double. I can change this to say double. But then ultimately I'm still telling console to get the next int. So how do I fix that? Well, instead of asking for the next int, I'll just ask for the next double. And the next double, and the next double. And then technically at this point that's not necessary, but I'll just leave it in there. And so now when I run it, type in 3 decimals, I can type in 2.1, 3.4, or 34.5, and 87.1. And notice I can type them on several lines or on the same line, and it'll tell me the average of them. Alright, so how do I do ints? Well, console.nextInt. How do I do doubles? Console.nextDouble. Now what about if I wanted to actually get some words? Like what if I wanted here to say, like kind of like a game where like it asks for a username. And print versus print line, if I say print line, it's going to give me the prompt and then move on to a next line. If I just say print and say what's your name, and I just say print, you'll notice that it'll just wait at the end of the line. Alright, so if someone's giving me their name, they're going to give me a string, and so I can say string name equals, and I can tell console to get the next. And when I say get next, it's going to get the next string up to the following space. So now if I compile it and I say what's your name, because I did a print statement, it's here I can say Jessica, and then it's just going to go and say the same prompt after that. So 5.3, 0.4, and 9.1. Alright, and it'll find the average. Okay, so what if I had typed in what's your name and I said Jessica Gilroy? You notice it's going to give me an input exception, not because I typed in Jessica Gilroy. The exception didn't come here, but it came later on when it was saying I'm looking for a double. So if I want to read in a full line, I can say console.next line, and it'll basically read up to the end character of that line. And so if I were to run it, what's your name, and I say Jessica Gilroy, and then it says type in 3 decimals, it'll do the calculation for me. So we have next int, next double, next line. Okay, the next line can get a little tricky, and I'll show you why that would be. And I'll actually put it here. What's your name? And then I'll do a print line statement so you can see the weirdness of it. I can say hi, name. All right. So in this next line, there's a little bit of weirdness happening when you're mixing next int, next double, next with it. If you look, I type in 3 decimals, and then it doesn't even pause for me to say what's your name. And the reason is, when I type in this 1, there's like this little extra character at the end. And so when I say console.next line, it basically clears the line to the end of the line. It reads from that third, after the third number I typed in, to the end of the line. And so what's happening here is it's just picking up that extra character and then assigning that to name. So if you are going to mix next double or next int or next with next line, you have to be careful. And if you get behavior like this, it's a pretty simple fix. You basically just want to clear out that extra inline character where you can say console.next line. Notice I'm not assigning it to variable because I don't need to, but what that does is it effectively clears to the end of the line. Type in 3 decimals, and then now you notice it's pausing because this console.next line cleared away that extra space at the end of my number. And so now it's free to wait, because there's nothing else that it's reading in. Now it's free to wait for the next string. And so then it'll clear it out. So that's just a little quirk that happens when you're mixing next line with the other ones. But in general, the steps are: you need to import the scanner class, that same exact line. You need to create a scanner object. In this statement, for now, the only thing that's allowed to change is the name of the variable that you use. Now, this variable that you use, you can use multiple times. You don't need to create one for each time you want to read in something, but you do need to create it. So for now, just understand that's how you spell it. That variable can be whatever, but that's the variable that goes and retrieves the next int, the next double, the next string, or the next full line. And then, like I said, if you're going to mix and match next double or next int or next with next line, there's a little bit of quirk if this comes towards the end of your input gathering, so you would want something like this to just kind of clear out that extra space. Best recommendation, play around with it. Make prompts, get the information, assign it to variables, do stuff with those values, output stuff. That's really the best way to learn it, is by doing it. Okay?